Once again, very welcome to this webcast, Talk2Connect webcast. How can we support a sustainable reintegration in Iraq? That is the topic of today, and hopefully we will provide some answers. My name is Lisa Tallroth, and one person who has been dealing with this very question is standing next to me here in our studio in Stockholm, Sweden. Constanza Vera Larosea. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're a researcher at DELMI, which is a Swedish Migration Research Delegation, that's right, and you have investigated the reality for returnees in Iraq. You will share your findings with us today, of course, but first let's take a look at the whole agenda, because we have some interesting returnees stories to share with you. After 2 years in Germany without obtaining residence permit, 20-year-old Mohammed decided to return to his hometown Erbil in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. We went to see him and other returnees to talk about their return and to see how they feel about their new life situation and the future. And we're also going to meet with ETTC, one of the largest service providers within reintegration in Iraq. And we're going to learn more about what they and others can offer. And then after the stories from Erbil, we'll pick up the discussion here in the studio. We have a panel prepared for you. I hope they are tuning in now as we speak. There you are, Amanda Bay, Protection Officer at IOM, calling in from Erbil, and also Mr. Dirk van den Boom, Director at the German NGO Integplan, and both of you are experts on return and reintegration. And we look forward to talking more to you later on. We will also connect with Mr. Hajjaj Mustafa, who's a program executive at ETTC in Erbil. They will all be ready to take your questions by the end of the hour. I'm reminding you of that, to use the chat forum if you want to send us your questions. All right, I hope that you, like me, believe that this is going to be an interesting hour. And Constanza, I think it's proper to start today's webcast with an introduction to the country we're talking about, Iraq. And we see it here on the map. This is a complex country, and it's a large country with more than 45 million people and many political and cultural layers, several ethnic and religious groups. Things that good to keep in mind when you, as a counsellor, and whenever you discuss return and reintegration in Iraq. We see the capital Baghdad and also the capital of the region, Kurdistan, pointed out here, but because this is something to keep in mind.
Iraq is a federal, parliamentary and Islamic republic, and the country is divided mainly into regions and governorates. Both regions and governorates are given broad autonomy, and from the northern provinces emerged in 1992 the Kurdistan region, which is autonomous, an autonomous entity inside of Iraq with its own local government, the KRG, and a parliament.
And combined with this political structure, we also have a large diversity within ethnic groups and religion. This is just a brief overview of a rather complex landscape.
Yes.
But can you please?
Yes, well, the three largest demographic groups in Iraq are Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and Kurds. And it is estimated that between 75 to 80% of the inhabitants are Arab, and between 50 to 20% are Kurdish. And there is a 5% where most of them make up by most of the minorities in Iraq.
And I think that further on in the discussion, we will keep reminding ourselves the importance of having this cultural context in mind. So that's why it's good to know that it is something that you need to look into more deeply if you are counseling on Iraq. This is also a country with a large migration. Many people are displaced within Iraq or have emigrated to bordering countries, to North America and to Europe, which is our topic of today. And we'll have a map showing a number last year in 2022, 29 1,000 asylum applicants with Iraqi citizenship came to the Schengen territory.
And this is more or less the average of Iraqi citizens living for Schengen in the past 10 years.
Yeah. And although we have a European perspective, we can just have a look at the picture and the major receiving countries for Iraqi citizens. That's Germany, Sweden, and Greece. And this is also more or less what it's been looking like the last years.
The last 10 years, yes.
So, all right, so 29,000 people came, 50% more or less got rejected, and that is a number saying 14,000 who in the last year, 2022, got an order to leave. This is not the same as implemented returns, of course. That number is much smaller. But for this group, and if you refer to your research, the groups who are set to return to Iraq, what kind of journey expects them?
Well, return to Iraq is difficult because in many cases, the reasons that led Iraqis to migrate to Europe still exist when they return. So there are feelings of insecurity and vulnerability among the Iraqi returnees. And besides, they face a difficult economic situation and they have difficulties to provide for themselves and their families. And in many cases, they are heavily indebted because they take loans prior to their migration to Europe in order to be able to cover all the costs. So the situation doesn't look particularly good for them after return.
No. And we're going to hear more about your research, but so you will stay here with me in the studio and we'll hear more about your findings, but we have some first-hand return experience to share with you, people who have overcome some of these obstacles Constanza just mentioned. And my colleagues in the Talk2Connect team, they went to Erbil to meet with Mohammed, Faris and other former migrants who have after rejection in Europe, returned to their home country, and by the help from ETTC and IOM, they found a new possible future for themselves and their families.
بزنس زيكات ودتي بكي أو نواقصي هيتي لبوت تواو دكات ندس كان خوش بيتن ودتواني شكاني خود أمور كاني خود بصورة
هستن بخوشی که هر شچه بنده گفت عزلتیات خوان نکت بخوش لو درست لکی.
هیچ لازم نبود. ما نوعی من لیرا نمانلو.
Now we are at the ETTC reception center. After return to the home country, the counselor, they will make an appointment to visit to the ETTC. So we have different services such as business startup, small business startup, job placement, and also we have education for the kids, and also we have legal issue, social issue, plus the health medical treatment for the cases who they are after return to the home countries.
لقل خزمو كسكان من يعني بيشوازي لي كردينو وزور دلخوش بهم يعني بو كاريكا كرديان يعني براستي توقع من ندى كرد بس ترخاي اي تي تي سي وكاكفوات زور يارمتي مني عندك لما طارج دا بس بارش عنديني يعني تقريبا هالنفري 615 يورو مان ورقر.
I try to collect as much as I can information about the family, especially about their needs and about the children's needs and adaptation issues. Hopefully, the good news was the family have solved the issue of their youngest children, that their youngest child, that she could not continue her studying in Germany, but right now she can continue the studying, and so she will not lose 1 year of her studying. The most important things for a successful counseling, I think, is that being a good listener and being empathetic to the returnees that they have lost almost all of their things when they migrated to Europe, and when they come back, they need a support, and they need someone to be empathetic, and of course, they need an NGO to show them and guide them. So how can they find another job, how to reintegrate the best in their country.
I like the work, and I like this kind of a professional. So supporting people who left the country and for a certain period of time, and now they are back home again and they are in need. So we really enjoy helping them. Yeah. We have a long experience in providing reintegration services in Iraq, and we have a very good structure and team who can deal with the returnees, and due to the fact that we are covering over all Iraq, so any returnees coming back to Iraq in any places, we can reach them and support them. They arrive here, we receive them at the airport with a welcoming kit. Then we give them our addresses and our contacts. Then later when they come, we will start with the first counseling to explain everything to them. And the second counseling or the second meeting, it will be to develop a business plan or a reintegration plan for the returnee. And the third meeting, it will be to implement the plan. And after this meeting, we try to communicate with them to do the monitoring and evaluation. And of course, they can reach our centers anytime they want.
Mrs. Bean, she is a counselor for ETTC, working at senior counselor for integration. And this is the returnee. They are returned. They have appointment with Mrs. Bean to have a different counseling session in order to inform them regarding the reintegration program.
For all the returnees who came back to us, who we are counseling with, once they arrive and we saw that they are lost in their life, we get very unhappy for their situation, but we motivate them. We give them the advices. We show them the right way in order to stand up on their feet again. She was lost as all the returnees that they came back to their country. But today, as the second meeting, we saw the improvement in their in her situations. As she was very interested and motivated, she followed the advices and the motivation on the first meeting that we gave her.
هستم بودا كرت هستش خوش ما ولا بروي بالضبط لوي أو رخراوم دوزية وبراس زور الخوش بمبو لبروي زور يوا خونم لداز دا بلام إتتسيم دوزية وأقدر كلامه كأو رخراوه هي أو يعني زيد الخوشي ولومن واستاج زور سباس نكمو ودمي ليستا خونا كام دست بكمو وقرامو هيوا أو تكام قرام.
بەڵێ بڵیارماندا بۆ عایلی سەفەر بکەین هەندێک هۆکاری تایبەتی خۆمان هەبوو و لێکوانە ناتوانم باسی بکەم تایبەت بە خۆمان بوو چوین بۆ ئەڵمانیا. شش مانگ لێوێن دەرماینەوە ژیانی بیدایەتەکەمان زۆر ناخۆش بوو کە دەچێکەم بە سەرەتاییەکان مەسەلەن شوێنەکان ناخۆشە و نانخواردن و شتەکان بەدڵیتون نییە و خواردنەکان مەسەلەن ئەوان دەیخۆن ئەمە عەزمان لێ نییە یان ئەمە دەیخۆین ئەوان عەزیان لێ نییە بیدایەتەکان ناخۆشە. هەستەکەمان ناخۆش بوو مەسەلەن کە دەڕۆی ئەو ڕێی غەریبیە ئەو ڕێی دەبڕی کەس ناناسی هاوزمانی خۆت نییە ناتانی لێوێن ژیانی خۆت ئوموڕی خۆت مەسەلەن ئیشکردنەکانت لەبەرەوەی زمان نازانی هەتا فێرت تەقالید و ئوسڵوبەکەی وێندەر دەبی زەحمەتە بەڕاستی ناخۆشە. هەستەکەمان ناخۆش بوو مەسەلەن کە دەڕۆی ئەو ڕێی غەریبیە ئەو ڕێی دەبڕی کەس ناناسی هاوزمانی خۆت نییە ناتانی لێوێن ژیانی خۆت ئوموڕی خۆت مەسەلەن ئیشکردنەکانت لەبەرەوەی زمان نازانی هەتا فێرت تەقالید و ئوسڵوبەکەی وێندەر دەبی زەحمەتە بەڕاستی ناخۆشە. لەوێندەرێ منەظەمەی IOM هەیە لەوێندەر هاوکاریکردین دکتی تارێ لۆ بڕین و مەسەلەن لە ئەمە قیتاری ئامادەکرد لەوێندەر کە بگەڕینەوە مەتاڕ و لە مەتاڕ پێشوازیمان لێکرا لەوێندەر کە سواری تیارەی بین و بگەڕینەوە کوردستان و هاتینەوە کوردستان. زەڕوریەکە ئەوە بوو کە مەسەلەن ماڵێکی دانەی خانی هەبیتن و نییە سیارە هەبیتن کە فرۆشتیتت نەدمایە ئیشەکەت نەمایە بەس ئەوە لەگەر برایەکەم لێرکوانە پێکەوە بووینەوە هاتنەوە سەیشەکەی بەزنەوە قسەکانیت کە مەسەلەن وەکو خانی و سیارە ئەوانە لەوێندەر لای ئۆمی ڕقم تەلەفۆنیان هەیە و لەسەر وێندەر ناوی منەظەمەکە ETC نووسرایە و هاتینەوە لێرکوانە تەلەفۆنمان لۆکردن و پەیوەندیمان پێوکردن و کە توانیان هاوکاریمان بکەن و دەستیان خۆش بڵێ زۆر دەوریە بوو دەستخۆشیان لێ دەکەم هاوکاریت دەکەم مەسەلەن لە بزنسەکەت ئەو بزنسەی کە ئەتوو دەتەوێت بکەی ئەو نەوا قسەهێتی لە بۆ تەواو دەکاتن دەستیان خۆش بیتن و دەتوانی ئیشەکانی خۆت ئەمۆڕەکانی خۆت بسۆڕێنێ.
ژیانێکی زۆر نۆرمالم هەبوو ژیانێکی دەرەجەیەک لە وەزعی مادیم لە وەزعی خانیم وەزعەکانم هەمووی دەرەجەیەک بوو بەس خوای خۆشەویست خۆشێکی لۆ ناردم کە ئەو خۆشەش شکرانەی دەکەم کە چوومە ئەوروپا نخۆشەکەم نەجاحەتی هێنا و ئەلحەمدولیلا بە شکر گەڕام و ناو مارمداری خۆم. لە پاریس گرانی بوو شەوی بە 100 یۆرۆی بوو براکەی بەریتانیام تەلەفۆنی کرد گوتی وەرە دانکیخ لەوێن لە جەنگەلی بە هەتا بەڕێت کەم بێ بەریتانیا لەوێن دەری پەنجەمۆری ئەڵمانیام هەبوو لە فەڕەنسای ئەڵمانیا داوای کردمەوە ئیشم کرد ئەو نۆمانگەی تڕاکیۆم کرد لەکن ئەو ناسیارەکەی خۆمان ئەویش کورد بوو چکە هاوزمانی خۆم بوو 9 مانگ 3 مانگ لێ تەمدید دەکردمەوە بڕیاری ئەوم دا کە مارمدارم هەیە لێرە ئەلحەمدولیلا بەشکر وەزعەکەم زۆر باش بوو مستەقر بووم ژیانم تەئەمین بوو بگەڕێمە ناو مارمداری خۆم 7 ڕۆژ کە هاتمەوە یعنی پاش 2023 ئەزە تاریخەکەی نازانم بزەبت کە هاتمەوە لە 7 ڕۆژەکەی لە مارێ بووم لە ناو مارمداری خۆ تەنسیقم کرد لە گەریان و تەلەفۆن ئیشمان بە بزنزی کرد نسعەتی ئەویان کردم گوتیان محاولە بکە نەجاعەت بینی لە بزنزەکەی خۆت یعنی پارەی پێ بدە خۆت مێلەوە وهە بکە ئەتوو کە لەو مەبلەغە پارەی ببیە ساحب پارەشی زۆر ئاسان بوو زۆر ئاسان 3 ڕۆژ لۆیان تەرخان کردین کە بچین فێرە بزنزەکە ببین چۆن دەگەر مشتری قسە دەکەین چۆن پاتری دەفرۆشین چۆن تایە دەفرۆشین کوی استقبالی مشتری دەکەین.
Sustainable Reintegration Program the service provider cannot do by alone. So the Sustainable Reintegration Plan, it will be all the involved stakeholders to have a clear cooperation among them. Then we'll say, okay, this is the Sustainable Reintegration Plan. Because what does it mean, Sustainable Reintegration Plan? It means after returning to the home country, they have enough economy, sustainability, security, and self-confidence. That's all.
مقارنەکە ئێستا ماشەڵڵای خوای لێبی سبحان الله کە دادەنیشم و کە فکر دەکەمەوە کە تاعاتی خوای خۆشەویست دەکەم زۆر مرتاحم.
داواکارم ئەو کەسانی کە لێرکوانە ئەمۆڕیان ڕاستە ژیانیان ڕاستە مەسەلەن هیچ نەوا قسەچیان نییە نەچنە ئەوروپای و هیچ چۆکارێک نییە کوردستان بەجێنێڵن.
For us as a service provider, it is very easy to communicate and to go ahead with the process. But if they will They don't have sufficient information about the program. They don't have sufficient information about current situation in the country of origin. This will make for us a lot of challenges, and that will make they didn't trust us to go ahead with the process of reintegration program. So my advice, again, each member state, they have a focal point. The focal point should be responsible to inform all the caseworkers about the program first, and then how to communicate with the service provider in case if they have any issue regarding the integration program under any program.
Some first-hand experiences from returnees in Erbil. And Mr. Hajjaj Mustafa, he will join us later for the Q&A. That's gentleman from ETTC you saw last in the film here. But for now, I want to turn to my guests, my panel, Amanda Bay and Dirk van den Boom, and Constanza Vera Larosea, who is still with me. We all seen this film now. You are all experts on return and reintegration from different angles, and I'm so eager to hear your reactions. Maybe I'll start with you, Amanda Bay. You're working at the IOM, who was mentioned in the film as well, one stakeholder within reintegration in Iraq. We are looking for examples of sustainable reintegration. Do you think that is what we just saw?
I think sustainable reintegration, it depends on each individual. Ultimately, for IOM, we have an integrated approach to sustainable reintegration. We believe that for one to have a sustainable reintegration, you need to have economic stability, which was mentioned in the video, social stability as well, within your communities, so having that strong social and family network, and also finally psychosocial well-being, which is of utmost importance. You need to be okay, you need to have this self-confidence, and you know, if you don't have that psychosocial well-being or even the other factors, how are you going to actually feel reintegrated into your community and feel that you can supply for yourself and for your family? Because these are things, as Constanza rightfully said, a lot of the drivers of what make Iraqis move and migrate irregularly, especially, is because they have a lack of economic opportunities, lack of livelihood opportunities, or even lack of access to social or basic services. So having these things in place, they'll be able to want to stay and support their families, which is of utmost importance to Iraqis. Thank you.
And the IOM, the UN Migration Organization you're working for, you have a similar model as the one ETTC described for us in the film. Is there anything you want to add in the way you work with return and reintegration from your side?
I think the processes are quite similar. As ETTC mentioned, well, in our case, maybe I can just explain our process. So considering IOM has offices in multiple countries, we coordinate with the IOM in the country of where that individual is. So for example, if we can say Germany, IOM Germany can reach out to us and say there is an individual who would like to voluntarily return. And so we support this process. We make sure to do a counseling session, assess vulnerabilities, make sure that there are no protection concerns, and to see if they're fit for travel, because a lot of them come back with medical needs. And once these processes are done, then we support them with the process of return, travel in this case, and we also provide airport transportation, onward transportation upon arrival. And from there, we inform them, you know, they can reach out to us, as also the returnee in the video mentioned, and we do another level of counseling, you could say, in which then we again reassess the needs and then establish a reintegration plan depending on their eligibility for reintegration, and also if they might have medical or mental health and psychosocial needs, we look into those and see how we can support them.
Yeah, we're going to get back to some of the support you provide and the different kinds. I also want to remind you that all the ones watching now can ask your questions to the panels through our chat forum. If you have any questions, it will take Q&As by the end of the hour. But for now, I'm the one asking the questions. So, Dick van den Boom, I wonder, when you saw this film from Erbil, what went through your mind?
Well, what clearly went through my mind in the beginning is the issue is what are we doing on our side? And there are two factors which are very important, and that is access to counseling and time for counseling. And both these are both posing a big challenge. In Germany, we have a decentralized system of return counseling, thankfully. So access is not the big issue, but time. Once a returnee has made it up his mind to return, there's often this dynamic energy to say, okay, now I want to go. Now let us be fast. So all what we want to do in peace, discuss economic reintegration, social reintegration, and so sometimes is not on the mind of the potential returnee. Sometimes he just wants to have a ticket and maybe some money, and in 2 weeks wants to be home. This can be an obstacle to sustainable reintegration.
Yeah, that the process is rushed through. But I also want to ask you, Constanza, because you have a larger material out of your research. You've done 40 in-depth interviews with returnees as the ones we saw. And if you merge the stories we heard right now from Erbil with your research, what are these typical examples, would you say, or...?
I believe we just watch more successful examples. We had some examples where people do not succeed, where they are not feeling well, psychologically, economically, but also they lack the resources and they lack the support, they lack the social networks that are necessary for a sustainable reintegration, as Amanda mentioned before.
Evidently, there is a link between this feeling of loss, the need of building trust, and the information. So, yeah, Amanda, please go ahead.
Sorry, just to go off what Constanza said, the reality is true. Actually, you will see more cases of Iraqis not having successful reintegration because they lack these family ties, for example, or community ties. And this is why that's also such an important component. And actually, through our work, we've seen that a lot of Iraqis, even after returning, for whatever reason they chose to return, they still choose to re-migrate, and even through irregular means. So these are part of the reasons why, from our side, we try to look at the drivers and see how we can address those drivers that push them to want to remigrate in such a manner. Not that we are against migration, but we are all for regular pathways and ensuring that they do this the right way. And something Constanza said, lack of information is also an aspect that contributes to this. Having no information on what are the legal pathways also is part of the issue.
Yeah.
Over.
This keeps coming up. Lack of information or managing expectations, maybe the two sides of the same coin. How, in Germany, from your side, do you work with this? Managing expectations, trying to provide the correct information. Is it even possible to obtain from your side? Do you have the sources for information on what's going on the returnee side?
Well, yes, generally we have, because we have quite a good system of knowledge management. We ourselves are providing regular training programs for return counselors. So yes, the information is there if you're looking for it, but not all return counselors are in a position to actively do research. They have to rely on others, on partners, for example, IOM, who have the information and they can pass on to the return. Don't forget, from Germany, we have returned to over 100 countries in the world, and therefore the return advisors have to deal with such a variety of conditions that they can only be an expert in very specific topics.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, Constanza, please.
Yes, in our research, we found out that returnees do not always grasp all the information that they receive before return, because they receive a large amount of information and they are already frustrated and traumatized, so they are not always open to receive some new information. And I believe national authorities in Europe could do a better job in informing the returnees what sort of support are they entitled to receive. And we have some examples of very basic things. For example, it's not the same support that you receive on whether you return it voluntarily or by force. And for some returnees, they were unsure on whether they return voluntarily. They remember that they write a paper, but they didn't want to return. So for them, it's not very clear what their status is and what are they entitled to receive.
Yeah. A reminder that we on the member state side sit in a rather complex structure, and me myself, I was trying to figure out what kind of support was available, and there are several amounts of money that occurs. But just to make a short introduction to the two kinds that we heard about in the film, we have the in-kind and the in-cash. And Amanda, can you please explain to us the difference and how you work with these two sorts of support?
Yeah, so from our side in IOM, in-kind would be, for example, that we do a reintegration plan, and it can be to set up a business based on their skill set. And this is part of why counseling is so important, to have an understanding of what does the returnee want to do and what is their skill set, to see what is the most sustainable type of business they can run. Of course, the returnee may choose, especially if they're younger, they may choose to use their in-kind support for education purposes, for technical and vocational training. So it really depends on what the returnee wants to use it for, but we usually support them and provide this in-kind services. With cash, in this case, this is about just literally giving cash to the returnee, and they choose to do whatever they want with it. Of course, each country that does support these programs, they have their specific criteria. So it can really depend. In some countries, they don't have a specific criteria, and they say as long as you give this cash amount, and that is all they are entitled to, and they can do with it as they will. A lot of returnees that receive this cash can use it for paying medical, addressing medical needs, or paying for housing-related issues, or even paying for the schools, the education of their children. So it really depends on the returnee. We don't try to dictate how the returnee uses it. We provide guidance and can counsel just to ensure that they understand what types of challenges they may face depending on what they're choosing. And we go from there. And of course, we're always available to counsel them through if anything happens, and also afterwards.
And Dirk, the awareness of these different kinds of supports, and I mean, even to tell someone what amount of cash they will receive, is this something that you, from your side, are trying to grasp, or how do you work with this part of the counseling?
Yes, we try. We try to make this distinction, because we have, of course, the experience that sometimes maybe a colleague from ETTC is saying, someone came and asked us for money, to give them money, because they have been told in Germany they are receiving 2,000 euro, which is not true. They are receiving in-kind support. And this distinction to be made is very difficult sometimes, because also we have to be very clear. Sometimes the potential returnee doesn't want to hear the reality of support he or she is getting. They have the...
Oh, sorry, we lost you for a second there, the sound. As he was saying that the returnee doesn't want to not really hear all the... Are you back with us, Dirk? Okay, Constanza, can I toss this to you then? What are your experiences? Because I know that you, in your report, you say that these, whether it's in cash or in kind, they all come with obstacles. And what do you mean by that?
Yes, because for the first, we have difficulty in knowing exactly what type of support the individual got, because they didn't really knew who gave them the support. In many cases, they have to wait for many months to receive the support because they show the wrong documentation, for example, or they approach the wrong actor in Iraq. But most of all, we were striking to realize that most of this reintegration support wasn't used for reintegration, for a sustainable reintegration, just to ensure a future income. Mainly the cash was used for primary necessities, to buy medicines, as Amanda said, but also just to buy food and to buy clothing for their children. So although it's an amount of money that helped them and provide them some support in the days, in the months right after return, it wasn't really used for a sustainable type of return. And many of them were considering to migrate back to Europe because they cannot really see any future in their home.
Yeah, then it's not a case of sustainable reintegration for sure.
Yes.
But what I hear is that there are quite many structures in place. There are structures for support in cash, in kind, for counselling, yet we experience for many returnees a non-functioning situation. So where do we go wrong here? Do you have any idea, Amanda? I mean, even though we heard of your models, we know that you're still facing a lot of challenges. And do you have any ideas of what needs to be tweaked?
I mean, this is a very loaded question, I guess I would say. I mean, for us, ultimately, the thing is that sustainable reintegration ultimately depends on an individual level, right? I mean, sustainable reintegration for you might be different from sustainable reintegration for me. So this is part of the reason we see a lot of successful cases and also, unfortunately, failed cases. What I think is important for service providers is that we always need to ensure, comprehensive coordination. Just because, for example, one of the things we are implementing in IOM is we're trying to implement a virtual counseling program for multiple countries. And the reason for this is because what we've realized is that a lot of the returnees that come back to Iraq, they come back with a lot of expectations, as you said in the beginning. And unrealistic ones, thinking that they may get, $20,000 from IOM to go live their lives, in which that isn't the case. And this is not to say that the return counselors in their host country said those things, but it's the lack of information. And as Constanza said, sometimes it's overstimulation of too much information and they're not processing. So I would say for us, what's really important is having these virtual counselings where then prior to return, we can have these conversations with those returnees and explain, okay, these are actually the realities on the ground. These are the types of challenges you're going to face. Are you okay with that? Do you understand that? Because for IOM, we support voluntary return. We don't support forced returns. So we always want to make sure that informed consent is always present and that they can return voluntarily. So also, having the understanding of the type of protection concerns. We've had cases in which sometimes we don't know that an individual had MHPSS needs prior to arrival, and actually this created issues when the person arrived. So having the better communication, I would say, as much as possible, of course, between IOM or even other service providers and counselors, I think then we can have a comprehensive approach to how we can support these returnees and ensuring the best available services with what we have. And then ultimately, again, this is up to the individual, whether it's sustainable or not, based on their individual needs.
Yeah, we keep coming back to the pre-departure measures, Dirk, and that is your table, partly. Do you have any idea what could be needed to better perform this information or the counseling or just get across with a message?
Well, I can tell you from the German experience, what I think we need is, first of all, some kind of quality standards. There's no definition of what return counseling actually includes, what kind of qualification we need to perform this task, and what kind of funding is necessary to have a good return counseling office running. Every state in Germany is doing its own, and if I look at the European Union, everyone is doing its own as well. So if you talk about what we need to be done here, you have to talk about quality standards for pre-departure counseling, and I'm afraid that we are very far away from these.
All right. No, we don't want this to be all a downer. We were saying this earlier, that we need to also point out what there is to build upon, if anything. And I know, Constanza, that you can help us here, that because you, in your research, there are windows of opportunity also in Iraq when it comes to reintegration.
Yes, and in our study, which is called Those Who Were Sent Back, we have several recommendations on how things can be done better. And one of the things that Amanda named is that migration and return are always individual process. So our recommendation on reintegration programs concerns basically the design and the delivery of the support, because we see a need to reformulate programs in a way that these can be tailor-made for the individual, for the family, and for the needs of the beneficiaries in general, considering the context, but also considering the person, in what position he or she is in its life, and also based on the context of the country. And to take help from local organizations, we believe can be a basic tool, because many of these programs are made from a European perspective of what people might need, from a welfare country perspective of taking care of people. And these are individuals that need to thrive on their own in a very difficult context. So I think that should be made more specifically, more individually based, but also considering the difficulties of the context.
Yeah, and in your report, you also specifically points out the strength of families in the Iraqi society, which is something to build up upon. That is a strong driving force for reintegration.
Yes, because in our other case, we also interview Afghans, 60 Afghans, and Iraqis were better off than Afghans because they return home. Most Afghans who return, they actually grew up in Iran, for example. But in this case, they return to a place that they know, they speak the language, and they have some family networks, maybe weak networks, but they have networks that may support them, at least psychologically. And that's a very good tool to feel better, to feel in a familiar context. That's a very good point of departure in order to get a foothold and achieve a more sustainable reintegration.
And maybe this is something that you've understood in Germany, because Germany is pointed out as a good example when you talk about tailoring a reintegration program. And you have, you receive many Iraqi citizen asylum seekers, but you also succeed with more implemented returns than many of the other European countries. So, is there a secret here, or is there some key factors to success that you can share with us?
No, there's no secret. There's no secret. I'm sorry, I don't have secrets to share. I want to emphasize again what I've said at the beginning, and that is the issue of access. We have a much decentralized system with 300-400 return counselors all over Germany. So if there is the desire of an Iraqi citizen to return home, he doesn't have to walk around long. He has direct access in his vicinity, and the services provided can be quite significant. The problem here is that for many who are right now obliged to return, we have a new immigration law. They have now the chance to get a stay if they have been for some time in Germany, even with a weak residence permission. So actually, I expect for the coming 1 or 2 years, the number of returnees to Iraq to become less.
You all stay where you are, because we're gonna take questions from the viewers. And I then also can welcome Mr. Hajai Mustafa, I hope, who will be joining us from Erbil. No, we are expecting him. We hope to get him soon. We saw him in the film, but I still have you here to help me out with these questions that come in from the chat. You are welcome to write your questions in the chat, and my colleagues will pick them up. And we have a question here. Someone, I believe, a return counsellor who wants to know a bit more about the what happens upon arrival, apart from trying to connect with a reintegration partner, what occupies a returnee upon arrival? Can you, Amanda, tell us a little bit about the situation, you know, when you actually arrive at the airport? What's the situation like?
I mean, this again depends on a case-by-case basis. If the returnee is provided with or needs airport transportation or arrival assistance, IOM can be there to receive the individual at the airport. And let's say the individual is not necessarily returning to Erbil, but another part of the Kurdistan region, we can provide support with onward transportation. And then from there, we always make sure to let them know they can contact us, or if we already have their contact information, we contact them immediately to, again, explain the process of what is about to happen. And if they can, we try to have them come in person so we can have an in-person counseling, as that's always better than doing by phone. And in this counseling session, we go over the process. What are you entitled to in terms of reintegration or other types of support? How long that process takes, because we really need to manage expectations. I cannot emphasize this enough. And then we explain how long it will take and what processes IOM has to do in order to get that done. And for example, we also ask them for required documents, because a lot of the times before we can even give them any type of cash assistance or in kind, we need legal documents. And a lot of the times, unfortunately, Iraqis don't have legal documentation due to the fact that they've been gone for a very long time, or maybe they were never able to get it. So we also explain that process of what they need to do to get those legal documents ready, because otherwise they're unable to access like cash assistance, for example. Of course, if...
And sorry I interrupt you there, but that touches upon another question that came in here, which I think the importance of having the documents ready. And it's a bit late when you're already at the airport not having the documents, right? So this is really something for the pre-departure side to really emphasize the importance. And what can be, how can this be, this situation be avoided, that you are standing there at the airport with not the right documentations? Is this something? Sorry.
The problem is for a return counselor. First of all, the documentation you need is, first of all, to get the funding, and second for all, to have the ability to travel internationally. Aside from that, the knowledge about what is in addition needed in, for example, Iraq to do this or that, for example, put your children to school or to get a passport or whatever, is something which is in most cases a little bit out of the scope of the pre-departure counselor. There he needs connection to an organization like IOM or others like ETTC, who can provide these kinds of information in a knowledge base system, so that they can call upon that, but they need to take care of it. And I have to add to that not all return counselors are taking care of it. Some of them are just organizing departure. And that's what they are doing. And I don't blame them, but if you are working in a foreigner's office, you have many other duties and obligations. But these people are not getting pre-departure counseling in the sense of the word.
Okay, so there's really a checklist of practicalities that needs to be considered, or the returnee might be just stuck more or less at the airport, or we're not even getting through with the reintegration programs, right? Because you need to be able to identify as well the person in front of you. Amanda.
Yeah, if I may add, this is actually part of the reason that we are trying to promote virtual counseling, because we can really take the time to explain those processes, because legal documentation is one of the most difficult things for an Iraqi to achieve when they come back. For example, for females, if they don't have a male, like their husband present, it would be very difficult to get a birth certificate for their child if they don't already have that. So there are a lot of complexities to legal documentation, and this is why I emphasize that though I understand return counselors may not have this knowledge, and of course no one is expected to know everything about each country they're returning someone to, there should be this coordination with an agency in the country of origin, so they can help in providing this information so as to minimize these delays and these issues.
I have another question here, referring back to the introduction, where we said that Iraq is a complex culture, a complex country with many political, religious and cultural layers, large diversity within religion and ethnicity. And as a councillor on the member state side, how can you even start? Do you have any advice on how to approach this, Dirk?
Well, I don't think a councillor has to be an expert in every country of return. That will be impossible. If you have an area where there's a predominant group where most likely return is to be expected, then okay, you need some specific knowledge. And we, for example, provide country-based trainings for these kind of councillors. But you don't have to know it, but you have to know who to ask. And that is the next step. If you don't know it, you have to have someone, a focal point, for example, with IOM or another organization, you can ask to retrieve the information. So you don't have to know it, but you have to know the questions. So we train people to know the questions, even if they don't have the answers right at hand.
You are nodding, Amanda. You couldn't agree more, it looks like. No,
I completely agree with that statement.
Yeah, I see that Mr. Mustafa is struggling with tuning in. Do you hear us? Hajai Mustafa, do you hear us? Yeah, I'm not sure. We can't hear you anyway. Maybe you have unmuted your... Okay, we give you a minute. Okay, maybe your microphone is turned off. I'll give you a second to fix that, and because it'd be interesting to also hear from you. We're not succeeding with the connection to Erbil right now. Can you hear us?
Hello, did you hear us?
Now I can hear you. Great. I'm so glad.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm so glad you finally made it. We, as you know, we already met you in your daily work at ETTC office in Erbil, and now we are in the middle of the Q&As, and we were just talking about what kind of cultural awareness is needed on the European side when you counsel for return and reintegration to Iraq and Erbil. I don't know if you want to add something to that. Do you experience a typical lack of understanding from the member state side when it comes to counseling for reintegration in Iraq? And
okay, hello everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I would like just to add something regarding the counseling and your question. As you know, the counseling process, it is very, it take a lot of time and it take a lot of skills that to inform the returnee after return to the home country. So in different parts, the returnee, they need to be counseled very well and to be advised and to inform them about different things that after he will return to the home country, because as you know, he left the country for a long time and he will come back, many things it will change. And the culture, which, for example, if someone, they will live in Germany or other country, host country, of course, it's totally different after he or she will return to the home country. So I think preparing the skilled counselors in different places in Iraq, as you mentioned, that there is different culture, for example, in some governorate different from the others. So I think the skilled counselor can make some changes and awareness to the returnee after return to the home country.
And another question, thank you. Another question here touches upon the experience that the reintegration doesn't proceed as planned. It might get stopped for one reason or another. Do you have any experience from this, Amanda, when you cannot proceed, and in what situation does that occur? I mean, you don't get to the second or third meeting. Is that...
Sorry, I didn't understand. What was the question?
You talked about... Yeah. Exactly. You talked about you gave us a picture of your model, the same as in ETTC, that you have 3 meetings planned to take this step by step. And are there cases? This is the question where you cannot proceed with the second or third meeting and with the reintegration program. And what would be the reason for that?
Okay. Yeah, I can't say. I mean, I've been with the mission less than a year, but in my experience, what usually can stop the reintegration process is unable to reach the returnee. For example, sometimes they lose their phones. They stop answering our calls. This has happened, and this is from my experience in other missions as well, in West Africa. And in those cases, we don't give up. We still try to reach them with the information we have. We ensure that if we can provide them reintegration, we try to communicate with them. I know that in my experience in West Africa, there have been times in which the returnee may have died, unfortunately. And in those cases, when possible, if possible, we try to see if we can use the reintegration to support the family. Because of course, that doesn't mean that the family won't need support. So it really depends. But so far, I haven't seen any of those cases because usually the returnees are very proactive of receiving their reintegration here.
Mr. Mustafa, Hajai Mustafa, do you have any experience or can you point out the obstacles that might occur during the process of these 3 introduction meetings, or when are there situations when you... Please go ahead.
Of course, dealing with the returnee, it's not an easy task for anyone, even if the skilled counselors or the skilled reintegration officer. Sometimes the returnee, they will go through all the process, but at the end, they will fail in the plan and they didn't follow up. In many times we make a different appointment with the returnee and they didn't, or she didn't follow up. So in this case we try always to link it with the pre-departure counselor, because it is very important. If the returnee, they didn't got clear information in pre-departure, so it is not easy to follow the steps after return to the home country. And we faced a lot of difficulty with the returnee within limited information after return to the home country. Why always even if you noticed in my presentation in this one, I will try to through the focal point to advise the caseworkers when they have face-to-face meeting with the returnee, at least to give a brief information about the program and about the service provider. Because if they didn't have a clear information, they didn't follow up. They are understanding that they are just coming back to Iraq and they will receive the money. That's all. So this is a big challenge for us to start and to make the trust. But sometimes when we have a cash and airport receiving, we will try to make a trust that, for example, now we have under Frontex €615 for some cases. We will receive and we will giving them welcoming package. So this will make some trust, at least for next appointment, to enter the counseling and to start to be very close with the ETTC process.
Yeah, I believe that this is a complex mix of relations and practical matters that you need to handle. We are moving towards the top of the hour, so I want to thank all of you for participating. Constanza Vera Larcera, Hajai Mustafa, who came in late from Erbil, Dirk van den Boom from Germany, and Amanda Bay from IOM, also placed in Erbil. Thank you so much for participating in today's webcast. We are reaching the top of the hour, so before we end, I just want to remind you, I want to push for our webinar that we will have next week. We will continue the discussion on how to support sustainable reintegration in Iraq, and you are more than welcome to participate in this. You find a link in the chat now where you can register, or you look out for this in your inbox, invitation for next week's webinar. Webcast, there is another one coming up in June, 15th of June. We are preparing a trip to Senegal, where the French Migration Agency have what they call all-inclusive set up. This will be the topic for next webcast in June. What else? Reach out to us. We are happy to help you and answer questions and take your tips. Our address is Talk2Connect@migrationsverket.se. That should be shown in the screen, but there is also a survey straight after the webcast that will take you a few minutes and is of much value to us if you fill out. And with that, Constanza is waving to give us a last word.
Yes, because you can find our study at delmi.se, and the policy brief is available even in Arabic and Kurdish in case you want to share it with local organizations. And you can find and download it in our website.
Great. It's also in the chat available.
Yes.
Thank you for reminding me of that, those who sent back the link to that in the chat. I think that is all for now. Let's take a look quick. I said everything. What I need to say now is to wish you a good afternoon wherever you are, and hope to see you soon again. Bye.